The detention center on Kepler 442b hummed with the usual mix of alien voices and mechanical sounds. Captain Zara Voss of the Galactic Defense Corps sat across from the most unusual prisoner they had ever captured. The human female appeared calm, almost serene, despite being surrounded by 4 different species of interrogators. "State your name again for the record," demanded Commander Thex, his blue-scaled throat vibrating with authority. The reptilian officer had seen many criminals in his career, but none quite like this one. "Sarah Chen, formerly of the human colonial ship New Earth," she replied, her voice steady and clear. "And I've told you 12 times already, the creature you're hunting is my brother." The room fell silent except for the soft clicking of the insectoid translator, HiveMind Unit 7, processing the statement. Dr. Nalara, the 4-armed Aquarian psychologist, leaned forward with obvious skepticism written across her translucent features. "Miss Chen," Dr. Nalara's voice bubbled through her breathing apparatus, "the entity that destroyed 3 military outposts and killed over 200 soldiers cannot possibly be related to you. Our scans show it stands 4 meters tall, weighs approximately 800 kilograms, and possesses natural armor plating that deflects standard plasma weapons." Sarah's lips curved into a sad smile. "You don't understand what we've been through, what we had to become to survive." The 4th interrogator, a gaseous ethereal being contained within a crystalline shell, pulsed with colors indicating deep concern. When it spoke, the voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Elaborate on this survival you speak of." "Human." Sarah looked around the room at each of her captors. These beings thought they understood the galaxy, thought they knew the limits of what was possible. They had no idea what humans could endure, what they could transform into when pushed beyond every breaking point. 3 years ago, my brother Marcus and I were part of a research expedition to the dead system you call the Void Reaches. Our ship, along with 2 others, was investigating reports of unusual energy signatures near the 7th planet. She paused, watching their faces carefully. "We found something there. Something that changed everything we thought we knew about evolution and survival." Commander Thex's claws tapped impatiently against the metal table. "We've heard reports of your expedition. All ships were lost with no survivors. You're claiming to be from a mission that resulted in total destruction." "Not total destruction," Sarah corrected quietly. "Total transformation." The insectoid's compound eyes fixed on her. "Explain transformation." "Our hive mind processes require specific data." Sarah stood up slowly, and immediately 4 weapon barrels tracked her movement. She raised her hands peacefully, then began rolling up her sleeves. What they saw made every interrogator step backward. Her arms weren't entirely human anymore. Beneath normal-looking skin, they could see traces of something else, dark veins that pulsed with their own light, and what appeared to be small metallic nodules just beneath the surface. "The planet in the Void Reaches wasn't dead," Sarah continued, ignoring their shocked expressions. "It was sleeping. And when our landing teams disturbed it, it woke up hungry. Not for food, but for consciousness, for the ability to grow and change and become something more than what it was." Dr. Nalara's tentacles writhed nervously. "You're describing some form of parasitic organism." "Symbiotic," Sarah corrected firmly. "It doesn't take, it gives. But the process—" She sat back down, her enhanced arms now visible to all of them. "The process nearly killed us. Out of 300 expedition members, only Marcus and I survived the initial integration." The room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Commander Thex leaned forward, his predatory instincts fully engaged. "You're claiming that you and this creature are both infected with alien organisms." "Enhanced," Sarah said. "Not infected. The organism doesn't replace us. It becomes part of us, and we become part of it. We gain its abilities, and it gains our intelligence and creativity." The ethereal being pulsed rapidly, colors shifting between orange and red, indicating extreme agitation. The creature your military is pursuing shows no signs of intelligence or creativity. It attacks with pure animal aggression. For the first time since the interrogation began, Sarah's composure cracked slightly. Pain flickered across her features. Because you've been shooting at him for 6 months. Because every time he's tried to communicate, you've responded with bigger guns and more ships. Because he's scared and alone and thinks I'm dead. Communication? Hive Mind Unit 7 clicked frantically. No communication has been detected from the entity. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're listening for radio waves and data transmissions. Marcus doesn't communicate like that anymore. The symbiotic organism enhanced his abilities in a different direction than mine. I kept most of my human appearance and gained enhanced healing and sensory perception. Marcus... She paused, pain evident in her voice. Marcus became something built for protection and survival in the harshest environments imaginable. She looked directly at Commander Thex. He communicates through bioelectric fields and subsonic vibrations. Every time your ships approach, he's been trying to ask the same question. Where is my sister? The silence that followed was broken only by the mechanical humming of the detention center's life support systems. Each interrogator processed this information according to their species' nature, but all arrived at the same conclusion. Even if what you're saying is true, Commander Thex said slowly, the entity has killed hundreds of our people. It must be stopped. Sarah's enhanced senses picked up the subtle changes in each interrogator's posture and biochemistry. They were afraid, but they were also calculating. They saw her as a potential weapon, a way to control or destroy her brother. You're planning to use me as bait, she said matter-of-factly. Dr. Nalara's tentacles stilled. The thought had occurred to us, yes. If this creature is truly your brother and is searching for you, then your presence might allow us to predict its movements. And then destroy it with overwhelming firepower while it's distracted, Sarah finished. You're thinking like military commanders instead of thinking like beings capable of reason? The ethereal pulsed with skeptical blue light. You suggest an alternative approach? Sarah leaned back in her chair, and for a moment the interrogators caught a glimpse of something inhuman in her eyes, a depth of perception and intelligence that seemed to look right through them. I suggest you let me talk to him, but not as bait for a trap, as his sister who understands what he's been through and what he's become. She paused, letting that sink in. Because if you keep attacking him, eventually he's going to stop running and start fighting back with everything the symbiotic organism has given him. Is that a threat? Commander Thex's voice carried a dangerous edge. It's a warning, Sarah replied calmly. You've seen what Marcus can do when he's frightened and defensive. You haven't seen what he can do when he's angry. The four interrogators exchanged glances, each species' version of concern playing across their features. They had captured what they thought was a simple human criminal. Instead, they were dealing with something entirely new, something that challenged everything they understood about biology, evolution, and the limits of what sentient beings could become. Outside the detention center, alarms began to sound. Red lights flashed as emergency broadcasts crackled through the communication systems. Another outpost had gone silent, this one only 50 kilometers away. Sarah closed her eyes and concentrated. Through her enhanced senses, she could feel it. A familiar bioelectric signature, growing stronger and closer. Marcus had found her trail. He's coming, she said quietly, opening her eyes to look at each interrogator in turn. And he knows I'm here. So you have a choice to make, and you need to make it quickly. Commander Thex was already activating his communication device, calling for additional ships and weapons. What choice? Sarah stood up again, this time making no effort to hide the inhuman strength in her movements. The metal chair she had been sitting in bore the imprints of her fingers, where she had unconsciously gripped it. "You can trust me to talk to my brother and find a peaceful solution," she said, her voice carrying new harmonics that made the insectoid's translator struggle to keep up. "Or you can keep treating us like monsters and discover exactly what monsters we can become when we have no other choice." The alarms grew louder, and through the detention center's reinforced windows, they could see ships launching into the night sky. Somewhere in the darkness beyond, something that had once been human was coming to find his sister. The interrogation was over. The real test was about to begin. The defense fleet of Kepler 442b had never faced anything like the entity approaching their planet. Admiral Kresh, a veteran reptilian commander with scales bearing the scars of a dozen conflicts, watched the tactical displays with growing unease. His fleet of 47 ships, including 2 dreadnoughts, should have been more than sufficient to handle any single threat. But this wasn't any single threat. "Admiral, the entity has breached our outer sensor grid," reported Lieutenant Yix, her insectoid compound eyes reflecting the red glow of warning lights. "It's not using any known propulsion system. Somehow it's moving through space without generating heat signatures or exhaust trails." Admiral Kresh studied the readings with growing alarm. The creature appeared to be swimming through the vacuum of space as easily as if it were underwater. Its massive form, clearly visible on visual sensors, seemed to pulse and flow rather than simply travel. "How is that possible?" demanded Captain Vorth, the ethereal tactical officer, whose crystalline shell flickered with rapid color changes indicating extreme stress. "No biological entity can survive in hard vacuum, let alone propel itself through space." From her position under heavy guard on the bridge, Sarah Chen watched the displays with a mixture of pride and terror. She could see what the alien officers couldn't understand. Marcus wasn't defying the laws of physics. He was using them in ways that these species had never imagined. "The symbiotic organism doesn't just enhance biological systems," she explained, her voice carrying clearly through the tense bridge atmosphere. "It integrates with them at the quantum level. Marcus can manipulate localized gravitational fields and create pockets of survivable atmosphere around himself." Admiral Kresh turned his predatory gaze on her. "You're claiming your brother has become capable of individual space flight and gravitational manipulation?" "I'm not claiming anything," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm explaining what you're seeing with your own sensors." On the main display, Marcus continued his approach. At this distance, they could make out more details of his transformation. He was indeed massive, easily 4 meters tall as Dr. Nalara had estimated, but his form was more elegant than the crude monster they had imagined. His skin appeared to be a living metal that shifted between silver and deep blue, and what they had mistaken for armor plating was actually an integrated exoskeleton that pulsed with internal light. "Admiral, he's slowing," reported Lieutenant Yix. "Distance to planet now 2 million kilometers and decreasing, but his approach vector is changing. He's not heading for the defense installations." Admiral Kresh felt his tail twitch with nervous energy. "Where is he going?" The answer came from their navigational computer. The entity was heading directly for the detention center where they had been holding Sarah. "He knows exactly where she is," Captain Vorth observed, colors shifting to deep purple indicating fear. "How is that possible from such a distance?" Sarah closed her eyes and concentrated. Even through the ship's heavy shielding, she could feel Marcus's presence growing stronger. The bond between them, enhanced by their symbiotic organisms, transcended normal sensory limitations. "We're connected," she explained without opening her eyes. "Not telepathically, but through bioelectric resonance. I can feel his emotions, his location, his general state of being, and he can feel mine." "Can you communicate with him?" Admiral Kresh demanded. "Can you tell him to stop his approach?" Sarah opened her eyes, and the alien officers saw something in her expression that made them step back. For just a moment, they glimpsed the same inhuman depth that had unsettled her interrogators. "I've been trying to communicate with him for months," she said quietly. "But he can't hear me clearly while I'm surrounded by electromagnetic interference from your ships and weapons. And more importantly, while he thinks I'm being held prisoner." Admiral Kresh's claws extended involuntarily. "You are a prisoner. You're both dangerous entities that have killed hundreds of our people." "Marcus has killed soldiers who were shooting at him," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference. And I haven't killed anyone. Yet." The implied threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances. Suddenly very aware that they were dealing with two members of a species known for their unpredictability and violence, now enhanced by unknown alien technology. "Admiral, incoming transmission," Lieutenant Yix announced, her voice high with stress. "It's not coming from any of our ships or communication satellites. Source? The entity, sir. It's transmitting directly to us." The bridge fell silent. Admiral Kresh felt his heart rate increase. "What kind of transmission?" "Audio, but not in any known language. It's mostly subsonic, but our computers are picking up patterns." Sarah suddenly straightened in her restraints. "Play it. Let me hear my brother's voice." Admiral Kresh hesitated, then nodded to Lieutenant Yix. The speakers crackled to life, and an extraordinary sound filled the bridge. It was clearly communication, but unlike anything any of them had heard. Deep, harmonic tones that seemed to vibrate through their bones, mixed with higher frequencies that made the insectoid's translator struggle to process. But to Sarah, it was perfectly clear. Marcus was afraid, angry, and desperate. He could sense her nearby, but couldn't understand why she wasn't responding to his calls. And underneath it all was a growing rage that made her stomach clench with worry. "What is he saying?" Admiral Kresh demanded. "He's asking why I won't answer him," Sarah replied, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "He thinks something terrible has happened to me, and he's getting ready to tear this entire system apart to find out what." As if to emphasize her words, the long-range sensors detected massive gravitational disturbances near the outer system. Marcus was testing his abilities, manipulating space-time in ways that made their instruments scream warnings. "We need to let him see me," Sarah said urgently. "We need to let him know I'm alive and unharmed, or he's going to assume the worst." Captain Vorth pulsed with skeptical orange light. "How do we know this isn't an elaborate trap? How do we know you won't both attack us the moment you're reunited?" Sarah looked at the ethereal officer with an expression of infinite sadness. "Because despite everything you've put us through, despite the fear and hatred and violence, we're still more human than monster. But that balance is very delicate, especially for Marcus." She turned to face Admiral Kresh directly. "The symbiotic organism enhances whatever traits are strongest in the host. I was always the analytical one, the problem solver, so I kept most of my human reasoning and gained enhanced perception and intelligence. Marcus was always the protector, the one who put himself between danger and the people he loved." The implications of her words settled over the bridge like a cold weight. "So his enhancements focused on combat and survival abilities," Admiral Kresh concluded. "And emotional intensity," Sarah added. "Which means every moment he can't reach me, every moment he thinks I might be in danger, he becomes more dangerous himself." On the tactical display, Marcus had closed to within 1 million kilometers. At this distance, they could see energy patterns around his form that their science officers couldn't begin to explain. He appeared to be generating a field that warped space around him, creating an almost impossible combination of defensive shielding and propulsion. "Admiral, he's accelerating again," Lieutenant Yix reported. "Current speed suggests arrival at our position in approximately 12 minutes. "Battle stations," Admiral Kresh commanded, but his voice lacked conviction. How did you fight something that could manipulate gravity and survive in hard vacuum? No, Sarah said firmly. If you power weapons, if you take any action he interprets as hostile, he'll respond with everything he's capable of. And you have no idea what that means. The Admiral turned on her with all his predatory intensity. Then what do you suggest, human? How do we protect ourselves from your transformed brother? Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility for both species settling on her shoulders. You let me talk to him, face to face, without weapons pointed at either of us. You trust that some part of him is still the man who once risked his life to save wounded civilians on Proxima Station. And if you're wrong? Captain Vorth asked. If the transformation has made him too dangerous to reason with? Sarah's expression hardened with determination that was purely, recognizably human. Then I'll stop him myself, because that's what family does. We protect each other, and we protect the people around us, even when it costs us everything. Admiral Kresh stared at her for a long moment, weighing impossible choices. Outside, Marcus continued his approach, and with every kilometer, the gravitational disturbances grew stronger. Soon, they would face a creature capable of tearing apart ships with his bare hands and manipulating the fundamental forces of physics. But perhaps more dangerous than Marcus's enhanced abilities was the look in Sarah's eyes, the absolute certainty that she would do whatever was necessary to protect both her brother and the people of this system, regardless of the cost to herself. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Kresh found himself hoping that diplomacy would work, because the alternative was a war against something that might be impossible to defeat. Lieutenant Yix, he said quietly, prepare a shuttle, and power down all weapon systems. The bridge erupted in protests from his officers, but Admiral Kresh silenced them with a gesture. We're going to try the human's way, because if we're wrong about her brother's intentions, we'll find out quickly enough. And if we're wrong about our ability to stop him through force... He left the sentence unfinished, but everyone on the bridge understood. They were about to test whether the bonds between siblings could overcome the transformation that had turned a human being into something that defied every law of physics they thought they understood. The shuttle bay of the Galactic Justice had never hosted a reunion like this one. Sarah stood at the center of the massive space, no longer wearing restraints, surrounded by a carefully positioned ring of alien observers who stayed well back from the designated meeting area. Admiral Kresh watched from behind reinforced barriers, his hand resting nervously on his sidearm, despite knowing it would be useless against what was coming. Through the atmospheric field that kept the bay pressurized, they could see Marcus approaching. This close, the full scope of his transformation was breathtaking and terrifying. His form moved through space with fluid grace, surrounded by a shimmering field that bent light around him like heat waves. Energy patterns danced across his metallic skin in complex rhythms that seemed almost like language. He's beautiful, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. And he's so afraid. Dr. Nalara, monitoring from a safe distance, recorded everything with her enhanced senses. The bioelectric readings are unlike anything in our databases. He's generating more energy than most of our smaller ships. But Sarah wasn't listening to the scientific observations. Through her enhanced connection with Marcus, she could feel his emotions as clearly as her own. 3 years of separation. 3 years of believing she might be dead, 3 years of being hunted and shot at by every ship in this sector of the galaxy. It had pushed him to the very edge of his sanity. Marcus reached the atmospheric barrier and paused. For a moment, he simply floated there, his massive form dwarfing the shuttle bay opening. Then, with careful precision that spoke of retained intelligence, he began to compress the gravitational field around him and slip through the barrier. The moment he entered the bay's atmosphere, every alien present felt it. The air itself seemed to thicken with potential energy. Emergency systems activated automatically, detecting gravitational anomalies and energy levels that shouldn't exist in a contained space. But Sarah felt only joy and heartbreak as her brother's feet touched the deck plating. Up close, she could see that his face was still recognizably human, though his features had been enhanced and refined. His eyes, now a deep silver that reflected light like mirrors, found her immediately. "Sarah," he said, and his voice was like distant thunder mixed with musical tones. The sound resonated through the shuttle bay and seemed to vibrate in their bones. "You're alive." "I'm alive, Marcus," she replied, stepping forward slowly. "I'm here. I'm safe." He moved toward her with surprising gentleness for something so large and powerful. But the alien observers could see the effort it took him to control his enhanced form. Energy patterns flickered across his skin like contained lightning, and the deck plates groaned under his weight despite his attempts to minimize his gravitational impact. "They hurt you," Marcus said, his silver eyes scanning her for injuries. "I can smell fear on you, stress hormones. They kept you prisoner." "They were scared," Sarah replied softly. "They didn't understand what we've become. They thought we were monsters." Marcus's expression darkened, and suddenly the temperature in the shuttle bay dropped several degrees. Ice crystals began forming on metal surfaces as his emotional state affected his control over local physics. "They were right to be scared," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the insectoid translator shut down completely. "Do you know what I've had to do to survive? Do you know what I've become while searching for you?" Admiral Kresh felt his survival instincts screaming at him to order an evacuation, but he forced himself to remain still. The human female had asked for this chance, and so far she seemed to be the only thing standing between them and a creature that could apparently freeze space itself. Sarah reached out and touched Marcus's arm, her own enhanced senses allowing her to safely make contact with his energy field. "I know, brother. I felt some of it through our connection. But you're not a monster. You're my brother who got lost and scared and had to fight his way back to me." For a moment, Marcus's control wavered completely. The gravitational field around him fluctuated wildly, and several pieces of equipment not properly secured went flying across the bay. But Sarah never flinched, never stepped back, never showed any fear of the power that could easily tear her apart. "I killed so many of them, Sarah," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking with very human anguish. "They kept shooting at me, and I just wanted them to stop long enough to let me explain, but they wouldn't listen. And after a while, I stopped trying to be gentle." "I know," Sarah said again, and her voice carried absolute acceptance and love. "But that's over now. We're together again, and we can figure out what comes next." Dr. Nalara, monitoring from her position, made a discovery that she immediately communicated to Admiral Kresh. "Sir, the entity's energy levels are stabilizing. His bioelectric readings are normalizing in response to contact with the female." Admiral Kresh allowed himself a small measure of hope. Perhaps the human had been right about the power of their sibling bond. But Marcus wasn't finished. He turned his silver gaze toward the observation area where the alien officers waited, and suddenly they all felt the weight of his attention like a physical force. "They were going to use you as bait," he said, his voice carrying clear across the shuttle bay. "I can smell their intentions, fear mixed with calculated aggression. They wanted to trap me." Sarah felt her brother's anger building again, threatening to overwhelm the careful control he had established. "Marcus, no. They're not our enemies. They're just afraid of something they don't understand." "They should be afraid," Marcus replied. But he made no move toward the observers. "Do you know what the symbiotic organism has shown me, Sarah? Do you know what it's taught me about the universe?" He raised one hand, and space around his fingers began to visibly distort. "Matter and energy are just different expressions of the same fundamental force. Gravity isn't a force pulling things together. It's the shape that space-time takes when mass exists within it. And consciousness. His eyes seemed to look through dimensions the observers couldn't perceive. Consciousness is what shapes reality at the quantum level. The implications of his words hit the alien scientists like a physical blow. If the creature was telling the truth, he had gained access to abilities that bordered on the impossible. Sarah, however, focused on the pain in her brother's voice rather than the cosmic revelations. "What has it cost you, Marcus? What did you have to give up to gain all this power?" For the first time since entering the shuttle bay, Marcus looked vulnerable. The energy patterns on his skin flickered and dimmed, and his massive form seemed to shrink slightly. "Dreams," he said quietly. "I don't dream anymore, Sarah. The symbiotic organism doesn't sleep, doesn't rest, doesn't imagine. It only exists and grows and changes. Sometimes I forget what it felt like to be fully human." Sarah felt her heart break for her brother's loss, but she also felt hope. The fact that he could mourn his lost humanity meant that he hadn't lost it completely. "Then we'll help you remember," she said firmly. "We'll find a way to balance what we've become with what we were." Together, Admiral Kresh made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. He stepped out from behind the barriers and walked slowly toward the center of the shuttle bay. Every survival instinct he possessed screamed at him to stop, but he forced himself to continue until he stood just outside the range of Marcus's gravitational field. "I am Admiral Kresh of the Galactic Defense Corps," he announced formally. "I speak for the allied species of this sector." Marcus turned his attention to the Admiral, and Kresh felt the weight of intelligence that spanned dimensions examining him with casual interest. "You want to make a treaty," Marcus observed. "You've realized that we can't be defeated through conventional warfare, so you're hoping we can be negotiated with." "That's correct," Admiral Kresh replied, proud that his voice remained steady. "We've seen what you're capable of. We understand that continued conflict would be costly for all sides." Marcus smiled, an expression that was somehow both alien and heartbreakingly human. "Admiral, you have no idea what continued conflict would cost. I could collapse the star that powers this system with focused gravitational manipulation. I could tear holes in space-time that would make entire planets simply cease to exist. But do you know why I won't?" The Admiral waited, knowing that his response would determine the fate of billions of beings. "Because my sister taught me that power without compassion makes monsters," Marcus continued. "And because somewhere in this transformed body, I'm still a human being who believes that different species can learn to understand each other." Sarah stepped forward to stand beside her brother, her own enhancements allowing her to safely share his energy field. Together, they represented something entirely new in galactic civilization. Beings with the power to reshape reality itself, but tempered by human emotions and values. "We propose a different kind of relationship," Sarah addressed the Admiral directly. "Not treaties between conqueror and conquered, but partnership between equals. We can help you explore parts of the universe that your current technology can't reach. We can show you scientific principles that will advance your civilizations by centuries." "In exchange for what?" Admiral Kresh asked. Marcus answered with a voice that carried the weight of cosmic forces. "Acceptance, a place where we belong, and the promise that no other beings will have to endure what we've been through, the fear, the isolation, the necessity of choosing between our humanity and our survival." The shuttle bay fell silent as the implications settled over everyone present. These transformed humans weren't asking for dominion or worship. They were asking for something much more complex and valuable: understanding. Admiral Kresh looked at the two beings before him. Brother and sister, human and something beyond human, dangerous beyond measure but driven by recognizably human compassion and love for each other. In them, he saw the future of galactic civilization, not the conquest of one species over others, but evolution toward something greater than any single species could achieve alone. "I accept your proposal," he said formally. "On behalf of the allied species, I welcome you as partners in exploration and discovery." Marcus nodded, his silver eyes reflecting satisfaction. "Then let us begin by showing you wonders you've never imagined. The symbiotic organism has revealed secrets of the universe that will change everything you think you know about physics, biology, and consciousness itself." As if to demonstrate his words, Marcus gestured toward the shuttle bay's viewport. The stars outside began to shift and dance, rearranging themselves into impossible patterns as he manipulated space-time on a scale that should have been beyond any individual being. But Sarah was watching the alien observers instead of the cosmic display. She saw wonder replacing fear in their expressions, curiosity overcoming suspicion. For the first time since their transformation, she believed that they might actually find a place where they belonged. The creature they had doubted was indeed her brother. But more than that, he was proof that evolution and enhancement didn't have to mean abandoning the values that made a species worth preserving. In the end, it wasn't the power that defined them, it was how they chose to use it. And they chose to use it to build bridges between worlds rather than barriers between species.